So, it seems as if those in favour of Scottish independence intend to, in my view, game and corrupt the next 2021 Holyrood election. The plan seems to be to run what amounts to a shadow party on the regional list, and then have that party fully support the SNP in the Scottish Parliament. Now, that seems to me to be a straightforward democratic abuse, and it seems to me, whatever your view of Scottish independence, to diminish the integrity of the whole cause by making it clear that they don't care how it is that they win. Now, folk typically overestimate the extent to which Scots favour Scottish independence, and I think it's worth pausing just for a moment to consider how slight the support is. In 2014, the Yes movement, which of course is broader than the SNP, the Yes movement managed, with a lot of hard work and a high price for oil, to get 44.7% of the people who voted to support the cause of Scottish independence. Now, this was in a high 84% turnout, which meant that 37.7% of the electoral roll actually supported independence. Now, we should remind ourselves that in 1979, when devolution was first proposed by the Labour government, it failed because it needed 40% support before it could be introduced. Now, that amendment, the so-called Cunningham Amendment, was not thought a major change to the legislation when it was introduced by the Labour MP. I think his name was George Cunningham. It wasn't thought to be a big deal because people thought there would easily be 40% support. Now, since 1979, it's become established as one of the great Scottish myths, up there with Margaret Thatcher, Milk Snatcher, and stories about the poll tax. It's become established that the dead in 1979 voted no. The claim is that the electoral roll was made up and then people died, and as a consequence there were fewer real people on the electoral roll by the time the referendum took place than the roll suggested. The government actuary who adjusted the electoral roll to allow for the deaths wrote to the Herald a few years ago to explain that this was quite false. But people don't really care about the truth. Scottish nationalists, in my experience, don't care too much about the truth. It doesn't really matter what you say about the fiscal deficit or anything else. They have their commitments. I wouldn't even call them beliefs, they have their commitments. Now, the great danger is that the people who are opposed to Scottish nationalism might fall into the same trap of having their commitments as well divorced from anything you would really call a belief. And you end up with this trenchant belief in both sides. So we need to tell the truth. And there's truths about the cause of Scottish independence, and there are truths about how to oppose it. The first, most obvious truth about Scottish independence is it doesn't have majority support. We do not have a situation where people are prepared to turn out and support Scottish independence if it comes to a real vote. Of course, in a panel-based study, when nothing hangs on it, they'll say they support Scottish independence, but when you actually put it to the test, 37.7% of the Scottish electorate supported Scottish independence, and that was when it looked as if both countries would be members of the EU, because the trajectory for Scotland to become an EU member was pretty clear. And of course the expectation was that the UK would remain an EU member. So that looked as if it was going to be possible, plus of course the oil price was high. We're now in a situation where we know that it'll be difficult for Scotland to become an EU member and perhaps unattractive, and we know for a fact that the UK will not be an EU member. Scottish nationalists make great play of the fact that the people were told that in order to remain a member of the EU, they would have to remain part of the UK. That was true when it was said, and it was true for 4 years. The fact of the matter is that if we had voted to create an independent Scotland, we would have been leaving the EU anyway. So the cause of Scottish independence is one that's prosecuted without really any great regard for the facts of life. And the great danger is that those who oppose Scottish independence make the same mistake. So we're heading into the 2021 Holyrood election. The separatists intend to try to game the election by having a regional list of candidates who are SNP supporters, but who are going to try and clean up the regional list by attracting the votes of SNP supporters who vote SNP in the constituency and vote for this new party or one of the new parties on the regional list. That's the strategy. How can this be countered? Well, one suggestion is that we support George Galloway and a few others, and that they will get elected on the regional list, and that they will hold this SNP government to account. George will teach Nicola Sturgeon a lesson. Do you think George is a better parliamentarian than Ruth Davidson? I don't think so. Do you think George cares about Scotland? Does he care about Scotland as much as, for example, he cared about Bethnal Green and Bow, or Bradford, or any other horse that he has ridden to get to where he wants to go, whether it's another box of expensive cigars or a house in Portugal? George cares about George. If George was the best parliamentarian that humanity had ever produced, you would be looking at the difference between George's performance and the next best performance by the next best parliamentarian that he would displace from the regional list. It's not going to make a blind bit of difference. And if it did make a difference, it would be a difference to the SNP's success in 2026, when the disaster would already be over. So this conceit and this lack of awareness about how parliamentary politics works will get us into a lot of trouble. The idea that everybody who's opposed to the SNP can unite behind a George Galloway ticket, and that is somehow going to make the difference in parliamentary opposition such that either the SNP don't misgovern between 2021 and 2026, or they are so damaged by the process of opposition that they underperform in 2026. This is the politics of the fantasies. This is we're away with the fairies. We've left reality at that point. So even if George Galloway and his merry band of men and women manage to displace some other parliamentarians on the regional lists throughout Scotland, the best that you could hope for is that their opposition, which, let's suppose for the sake of argument, is superior to the opposition provided by those who would otherwise be elected, that opposition will result in the SNP being slightly more competent for 5 years and will result in a downturn in their support in 2026. You really think that's enough? You think that's going to save us? So George Galloway cares about George Galloway. George will get elected and he will take the 65 grand a year for 5 years and he will disappear in a cloud of cigar smoke, never to be seen again. Be in no doubt about that. How about the next suggestion, which is, let's only put forward one candidate in the first past the post election on each of the 73 seats, and then we'll have a proper unionist candidate elected for each of these seats, and there'll be a broad agreement on health and education and law and order across the parties. So each party will put forward the parties will put forward one candidate between them. So in every case where there's an SNP candidate competing with the Labour candidate who's second placed and looks the most likely to win, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats will stand down, and that Labour candidate will accept the modification, as every Labour candidate in such a circumstance will select the modification of their manifesto to reflect to some degree the Conservative and Liberal Democrat agenda, and that will be true of every Tory. Every Tory who's second placed against an SNP, MSP, they will modify their agenda. So what we'll have is one broad agenda, which will be competence and centrist policies on health and education and law and order, and then a commitment to the union, one candidate against the SNP in every seat, and then they will win. You think that's going to happen? You honestly think that the Labour Party nationally are going to allow Labour MPs to get into bed with the Conservatives? Even if the Conservatives thought it could be done, and there's more chance that they would accept it, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, after what the Liberal Democrats suffered in the general election in 2015 after supporting the Tory party and coalition, and it wouldn't make any difference. The Liberal Democrats' support is so slight anyway. The idea the parties are going to agree to put forward one candidate against the SNP in every first past the post seat is even more ludicrous than imagining that George Galloway is going to be the solution to your opposition problems and a more vibrant, successful Scottish Parliament that can bring the SNP to heel. So that's not going to happen either. How about, for example, a kind of coupon election? Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that the Liberal Democrats and Labour and the Tories cannot actually agree to put forward one candidate, which will be the case. Suppose, for the sake of argument, some organisation calling itself maybe the majority hands out coupons. So what they do is they decide which Tory or Labour or Liberal Democrat candidate in each constituency is a strong unionist and will be most amenable to abandoning their own party if elected, and therefore governing in a kind of centrist way and supporting policies. Whoever is in office, whoever forms the Scottish Government, this approved majority candidate will be a strong supporter of the union, and they will be prepared to support centrist policies in health and education and law and order. So a coupon election. So we're not going to get the parties to agree to one candidate. Maybe an organisation like the Majority could hand out tickets, and therefore everybody would know who the majority's candidate was in the constituency. Seriously? You actually think it's going to help to split the vote further in a first-past-the-post election by encouraging some supporters to support another party and to unite the SNP's support against whoever that is, to create a further trenchancy in the nationalist support, to persuade a few people who might otherwise be Green supporters and might support a candidate on that basis to support the SNP candidate, because there's now this, as they would say, a conspiracy against the SNP. That's never going to work. That's again the politics of delusion and fantasy. Although, as I say, it's an interesting idea if it had been floated earlier, and if there was more money behind it and there was a different culture. You can argue about coupon elections. It's an interesting history. So those things won't work. What will work? What will absolutely, definitely, 100% work? Because I've got a solution. I can tell you exactly how to destroy Scottish nationalism. I can tell you how to prevent the misgovernment of Scotland. I can tell you how to solve every single democratic problem we've got in Scotland in one easy move. And it won't be done because it involves a few minutes of explanation. Okay? It's quite simple. It's called the single transferable vote system of election with randomisation of candidates. That's all it means. It's as simple as that. You divide Scotland up into constituencies of 6 or 7 MSPs, and each of the parties puts forward 6 or 7 candidates. And you put the candidates on the ballot paper alphabetically or reverse alphabetically. So when you get your ballot paper, there's going to be 6 SNP in there, 6 Tory, 6 Labour, 6 Liberal Democrat. But you'll need to know who you vote for. You'll have to look for them because you'll get a ballot paper that will either begin with a Z or an A. So all the candidates will be there, and you'll have to decide who you support. Consequently, every single candidate for the SNP will have to try to appeal to SNP supporters personally, because they will be competing against every other SNP candidate. So if you want to get elected to the Scottish Parliament as an SNP representative, you're going to actually have to be something other than just the bozo that was selected by some SNP candidate selection process because you would loyally support Nicola Sturgeon. You're actually going to have some qualities that appeal to particular cohorts of SNP supporters, and that will be true for all other parties. More importantly, when you get yourself elected, you will not be able to slavishly support your party because you're going to have to be looking at the voters. So if you've been elected for the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon or somebody else is doing something completely cretinous and it's going to destroy education or destroy the integrity of the legal system, you're going to have to use your own view as to how supporting that is going to affect you at the next election. So you will not be able to support stupid policies because SNP voters will not support you because they've got other choices, because they can put a 1, a 2, a 3 and a 4 next to other SNP candidates. So the instant you bring in this single transferable vote system of election with randomisation of candidates on the ballot paper, the ability of the SNP to control its representatives disappears. People who are elected for the SNP will be broadly supportive of Scottish independence, but they cannot afford to be slavishly supportive of stupidity or corruption or misgovernment because they'll be punished by it. More importantly, if the SNP leadership threaten to throw you out, what happens? Well, you run as an independent nationalist. If you get kicked out of the SNP for the right reasons, you can run as an independent nationalist with a fair chance of support because people will know that you had the guts to stand up to the leadership and they will give you a 2 or a 3 or a 4 and you'll still get elected. So if you bring in the single transferable vote system of election, all of a sudden the idea that you can game the system in the way that's been proposed for the 2021 election, that's out the window. There's no way to game it. And secondly, regardless of whether you think the gaming in 2021 will actually happen, regardless of whether you think that people who vote SNP first past the post will actually switch to another party in the regional list, Suppose for the sake of argument that doesn't happen. Suppose for the sake of argument the SNP's tribal loyalties mean that Thompson's party and other parties can't succeed in the regional list. Let's suppose that's true. Who cares? Bringing in the single transferable vote ends the SNP as a nasty, cronyistic little highly disciplined band of rent seekers. They won't be able to do what they've been doing since 2007 because ordinary SNP voters will look at shysters and say, I'm not giving you a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5 or any other chance because you have let us down. You would say that black was white if Nicola Sturgeon or Murrell told you to say it. So I'm not in the business of electing sheep. I'm in the business of electing nationalists. I support Scottish nationalism and I support the broad goals of the SNP, but I'm not giving you any support whatsoever because you lack integrity and you lack a spine and you lack a brain. The instant you bring in an electoral system that forces the SNP to have proper candidates, you destroy the SNP in Scotland because their mission can't afford proper candidates. Now, anyone that tells you the 2016 Scotland Act has devolved the electoral system to the Scottish Parliament, tell them one simple thing that they should understand. Westminster remains sovereign. It says it in the 2016 Act, it says it in 1998. The Westminster Parliament can legislate on any matter devolved or reserved. Given the shenanigans that are being proposed for the 2021 election, it is obviously the case that the Westminster Parliament should intervene and impose a single transferable vote system of election. That would end the attempted gaining of the election in 2021, but far, far more importantly, it would allow the Scots to have proper representatives in the Holyrood Parliament, regardless how effective you think the gaming in 2021 might be. And from a personal point of view, I find it hard to ignore the benefit of ending Nicola Sturgeon's control of our own party, ending this de facto monarchy that we seem to have created. We've got people standing in the streets applauding a politician, supposed to be a democratic politician, and we've got this kind of cult worship. This is a country that's lost its mind, or certainly a slice of it has. So we can have a much better politics. It'll be a politics, regardless of what your commitment is on the constitutional question, that better promotes the interests of Scots. And Michael Gove and Alistair Jack and the other ministers broadly responsible in this area can easily justify intervening and repealing the section of the 2016 Act necessary and introducing a single transferable vote system of election with randomisation, because the SNP supporters, if not the SNP, have made it clear that they intend to engage in anti-constitutional shenanigans. And given what we've been through in this country, it needs to stop. If you care about the Union, if you care about decent politics in Scotland, if you're a Democrat who actually thinks that electoral systems shouldn't be gained by people who don't care about how they win, then you have to contact your representatives and say, please intervene and please give us an electoral system that will work for Scotland. Cheers.